And also, I would ask that you give Miss O'Neill, she surveyed our course, and I really appreciate that. She's our labor administrator. So it shows his name. And now for some people who actually really know. Ladies and gentlemen, please round of applause for Jennifer Tebow from our high school.
All right. You go, Jim.
From Laurel Elementary School, Dr. Betsy McDormand. And I think one person who is absent got by me. I don't see Megan Van Meter, but from Laurel Elementary School. But let's give it up for Megan Van Meter. Also from Laurel Elementary School, Kelsey Fritz. From Laurel Middle High School, Zachary Furbay. And from Laurel Middle School, Michael Allen.
You go, Mikey. Would the board join me for? You're right. I like that.
Okay, board participation. Mr. Lee, would you like to start?
Yeah, hey, good evening. So I didn't get to the May meeting, and this isn't because Ms. Teague was here tonight, but I just want to say the last couple of years, and I know we have a lot of football pride here in this school, but me being a baseball person, I will say that I want to brag on the baseball team a little bit for making the playoffs for the second year in a row, and winning a state tournament game. And winning a state tournament game for the second year in a row, and we got to send Indian River home, which makes it even better.
Yeah, that's right.
But when you drive 2 hours away to go to your second tournament game, which is never easy or fun on a Saturday, and you look up and you see Boss Lady and her husband there. So that is Mrs. Giles shows up to the baseball game to watch them boys that day. And I will tell you what that meant to me as a Laurel High School graduate, a board member, a community member. To see that support is extremely powerful. And I just want you to know that that does not go unnoticed. And I talked about that for 2 days. So, and of course I love Clarence, so that goes even further. But for Laurel to be able to hire somebody like Eric Teagle as the head coach has also changed the culture at Laurel, and I am honest about that. He looks much better in red and white than he did in blue and gold. You know, I played against Eric, but I will tell you that a lot of people don't, if you're not part of the baseball, like have kids playing baseball, a lot of times you don't get to see it. Friday Night Lights, you get a lot of people out there, right? But you also look over now and you see the middle school team, which I think Mr. Allen was a part of. And you look over and you see 20 plus kids on a baseball field at one time. That is a huge statement of where this school district is going. For me, athletics is important. It kept me in school, honestly. It's going to keep my son going to college at the next level. But if you get a chance next year, to come out and watch a baseball game, because we're gonna be as good next year, we're gonna be good the following year, I ask you to do that. It's easy to come out on Friday nights, I know, because it's 7 o'clock. It's not easy to come out at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. But if you get a chance to come watch our head coach and our baseball players in action next year, I'm gonna ask you to do that at least one time, please. Because it's fun to see the culture change that's happened with Laurel baseball. And I don't mean to sound prejudiced, I don't mean to sound just isolated, but I am very proud of where that program has come to where we were years past. So, again, thank Eric for me, okay? And I love being a part of it. But thank you guys, thank you for being here tonight, and hard to believe that summer started. So enjoy it, and thank you.
Today's the first day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Pugh?
Just to add what Brad said, we've got to remember our softball team and our track team. And, you know, we've had some struggles in our community this year, but we've had a lot of success. So I'm looking forward to the end of August and starting all over again, and just having a really great year athletically and academically, and thanks to all the people in the buildings that make it happen.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mrs. Islam?
I think it was on last week. I'm kind of like lost somewhere with days off. I can't keep track of what day of the week it is. But we had a great time here at the high school, middle school, celebrating our staff, and especially those 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, I think.
And 40.
Yes, let's definitely not forgetting the 40. You know, just celebrating, you know, their retirement, or for those that retired, and for those that, you know, hit those milestone years, and even the people who were just anywhere in the numbers. It was just a great time. Everybody came together and really just celebrated each other. We had a great time together that, from morning to afternoon-ish, together, and it was just, you know, a good vibe. It was a good vibe, and I just wanted, as I said to them then, as a board, we just appreciate, you know, the commitment, the dedication. We've made great strides in positive directions. By no means are we perfect, but we're striving, and as things are brought, you know, to our attention as a district, you know, we put them into action, into finding strategies and ways that will, you know, make it better. So again, I just want to celebrate it all from the top, superintendent, all the way down to every aspect of every position that covers our whole district, and thank everyone for, you know, their service for this past school year, and asking, you know, get refreshed, take advantage of your summer, enjoy your family a little bit. No, not a little bit, a whole lot. Enjoy your family a whole lot, and, you know, let's get the motors running again around about mid-August, and ready to pump out again and perform like we know we do here in Bulldog Country.
Very good. Mr. Nichols?
As far as all athletics, are hitting on all cylinders. I mean, I was really impressed. But something that really impressed me the other night, I went to the awards ceremony with $4.8 million worth of scholarships, and the number of kids that we're talking about had a 3.0 and above in Laurel. That's a tribute to you guys. I mean, all I'm hearing, I hear everybody, well, that we're not getting this and we're not getting that. Well, when I said at that awards ceremony, I was thinking, maybe somebody's got it wrong. Maybe we need to let people know what we do have. No, I don't know what it is. I think it's Laurel girls are a lot smarter than Laurel boys. I was sitting there and I kept thinking, you know, that valedictorian, salutatorian, the top 10 was all, I'm thinking, okay. The boys seem to have other things on their mind. They need to get more into the academic part. But really, when you see what I saw, I just got prouder and prouder. Just with the more I sat there, the more I thought, you know, we're doing something. We need to let the community know we're doing it too. Because, you know, with the COVID thing and remote learning, that's where there's a remote chance your kid's gonna learn something with remote learning. So I'm hoping that they did learn something, and I'm hoping that we can bring it back up and get it up to speed. I look at the numbers for the state of Delaware, and they're not exceptional. But I think our numbers are, I think they're exceeding them, and I want ours to exceed the average of the state. I mean, it's been tough with the COVID, but I don't think law is gonna sit back and make excuses for what we lost. I think we're gonna bring it up, and I think, like I say, you said that award ceremony, well, Trina was there, you saw it. I mean, were you proud? So, I was too, and I want to continue that. I want to continue that with the athletics too, but the academic part really got to me the other night. So, let's keep it up.
Thank you.
We done? Okay. All right, ditto
Yourself.
to me. But one thing I want to say, and but Sabrina had already seen it. Look at these walls. I know. I walked in and I went to sit down and I went, what are they doing here? And then I went, wow, I love it. I love it. Are you gonna do any more?
The other side is done.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes,
Now
okay.
that we've seen this round, I think we can keep going.
Yes, I do too. I mean, I love it. I absolutely love it. We really don't need that law anymore.
don't need it.
No, we don't need that up there anymore. But I love it, absolutely love it. Okay, next, public participation. I don't see her unless she is sitting in between someone back there. But Mrs. Angie Cunningham had requested to speak this evening. More than our normal 5 minutes that is allowed, and Dr. Larimore is the one that grants the timing, and he had granted 7 minutes, and she was going to speak on violence in schools and low testing scores in Delaware. So I'm sure she will probably join us at a later time. So she's not here, so if you would make note of that. Ms. Lewis. Okay, so moving right along. Next, on reports, we have Becker Morgan Group here to speak on North Law Early Learning Academy Certificate of Necessity Report.
So before Becker Morgan Representative Brad Hastings comes up for the presentation, I just want to inform everyone and everyone who may be watching why he is here this evening. He is here this evening because I've asked Becker Morgan to do a feasibility study on a capital improvement project for the North Law Early Learning Academy. And why did I ask to do that? If you'll look at the screen. Since 2014-15, our school population in law has increased by over 30%. When I first got here, we had just over 2,000 students. Now we have just over 2,600 students. So a 30% plus increase. Law Middle High School has a capacity of 1,400 students. As of last week, they were at 1,181, which is 85% capacity for this building. And if you remember, we just moved 6th grade out of here last year to get it to 85%. Law Elementary School was doing fine until we moved 6th grade over because they had some availability over there. I have a 1,200 student capacity school. They are now at 1,137 students, which is 95% capacity. That leaves us one school, Malaya, North Law Early Learning Academy. Currently, it is just our pre-K and K building, and as Mr. Hastings is going to point out, there is a footprint there that is undeveloped, about 2 whole wings. We've developed about a wing and a half, or nearly 2 whole wings, to house our pre-K program and our kindergarten program, and those rooms have everything that these schools have. They are completely updated. We have the ability to update the rest of that school and save considerable money to our taxpayers if a CN were to be approved. A CN is a certificate of necessity. What happens with a certificate of necessity is that it begins the process of going out for a major building referendum. We have it very good at law. If we get a CN approved by the state pays 80% of that price tag. 20% is only paid by the taxpayer. Some districts have it as high as 65% that they have to, 35%, with the state only paying 65%. We're very fortunate that the state would pay 80% of that bill if we were to get it approved. So the first step is to have a CN submission approved by the board. That's why Mr. Hastings is here. And we'll talk about it here in just a second. Malaya, as I said, has about 2 whole wings that could be developed. That could add an additional 18 classes. It's got to be submitted by August, I'm sorry. So he has a very little turnaround, just about under 2 months. Then we won't find out if that CN is approved until November. If it is approved, that means we get 80% of the bill paid for by the state. At that point, we start having meetings with our stakeholders and informing the public. And
Years, but to see a lot of familiar faces and having had the opportunity to work with you on this school and the elementary school and to see how great they look and are being well kept, so kudos to the district there. So we'll get right into it here. A couple of things on the agenda. We'll do a quick look at the background and what we addressed looking at the buildings. Then we'll review some of the various plans that we were coming up with. And then we'll review the cost, and you already heard Sean talk about the schedule, so we'll get into that. So the original building, bulletproof glass, some people might call it. So that's something that would have to be addressed in this renovation work, as well as providing all new classroom door hardware, and then also installation of a panic button or intruder alert system. So any project over $1 million has to address these pieces. So that was something that was looked at. In order to address those requirements, you probably, again, some of you are familiar with the existing vestibule there, but you can see the red lines on the slide would be the areas that would have to be addressing that ballistic resistant material. Some of those existing walls are masonry now, so it's already kind of taken care of. But in some of those other areas, especially those that have glass, that would all have to be upgraded. So it would be a fair amount of work there. And then, as I mentioned, upgrading all the classroom door hardware and going from there. So that was the first piece we looked at. Mechanical upgrades, and there's a lot of information on this slide, but to suffice it to say, we were looking at upgrading the entire building's HVAC, heating and air conditioning systems. A lot of those pieces there are nearing their usable life, and so there are a number of pieces that come into doing that and upgrading the entire building, which you can kind of see here. The last bullet there, also worth noting, portions of the building are currently sprinkled, but not the entire facility. So as we were looking at renovation work, we wanted to include upgrading the rest of the facility with sprinklers. It meets code as it stands now, but that's just something that would be worthwhile doing moving forward. The next piece we looked at were classroom renovations for wings C and D, the shaded areas that you see there. That work would include asbestos abatement, as well as upgrading all the finishes kind of to match what you currently have in wing A, and then ADA restroom upgrades, handicap accessibility throughout the rest of the building. In working with those mechanical upgrades and improving the system that way, it's important to look at the outside of the envelope of the building. And as part of that, we looked at replacing all the exterior doors and windows with upgraded, thermally efficient windows and doors. The gym roof, and as I mentioned last summer, we replaced just about the entire roof on the building except for the gym roof. That's that blue metal roof piece that you see up there. We looked at it and looked at options, potentially recutting it, but where it is in its life, it made sense just to replace that. So that would be part of the plan as well, to replace that existing metal roof at the gymnasium. And some of you may be familiar with the existing gymnasium, which is it. See the big letter B there off to the right is where that current gymnasium is. As part of this plan, it could be reconfigured into 2 classrooms in the future with the ability to add a new gymnasium onto the front of the school. So you see that area there, approximately 8,300 square foot addition. You can see the size of the basketball court in there. So that would provide certainly space for physical education classes for the students, but could also be utilized for off hours and community events. We've included about 170 bleachers in there as well, so those type of events could have spectators included as well. So we took a quick shot at just to give an idea of what that could potentially look like with the new entrance at the front of the school and that gymnasium. Of course, the gym, tall space, so that would be rather large, trying to do something similar to what's been done at your other two new schools, picking up on the laurel colors and metal panels with the red and the white, and some masonry down below, and some glass up high, so you get lots of natural light in there during the day for students. Here's another view from, as you'd be pulling onto Wilson Street there, to kind of give you an idea of what it could potentially look like.
And if I can just interrupt you just for a second, Brad, if you guys, I know everybody's been in Malala, but, you know, like when we have our transition ceremonies, they have to be done in 2 flights, you know, of schedules, because the cafeteria is so small, and there's so many parents that want to be there, and we don't want to deny parents. So, you know, we're very adamant that we really need a space like this for our community to enjoy their students just as much as we enjoy our elementary students, or our middle school students, or our high school students.
So, in anticipation that something like this may come up, we had submitted to the state has a cost process, and got comments back on that. They would require some new sidewalk upgrades and the like, as well as when you're building a new addition to a facility, having addressed stormwater management. So with all those things going on, we looked at some upgrades to the site of the school. Off to the right, you see the stormwater management area. That would not be a wet pond, but a dry stormwater management bioretention type of area there. Reconfiguring the front entrance gives you some additional parking there, just kind of sprucing that up. I know there's some drainage issues currently. Down at the bottom left in that hatched area, that would be the site of the new gymnasium. So it's tight, but that little dashed line you see, the red, is the building restriction line, so there is room to add that addition in there. And you can see where we're looking at adding some new sidewalks in along the road there, and other site upgrades that would be necessary. This is another aerial view of that front entrance with those upgrades to the parking area, new canopy at the entry doors, et cetera, kind of really trying to just spruce up the front of the building. Then lastly here, the potential for a classroom addition back at the back of the D wing, which would be you remember those plans, the upper right-hand corner. So this shows a 7-classroom addition there, and that would, of course, come with the associated site work necessary to address that. So when you look at the entire site, you see where that 7th classroom addition would be down there. Still respects the existing playground areas that are down there, so they would not be impacted by that. We'd be doing all of the other upgrades I've talked about, those House Bill 49 upgrades, mechanical upgrades throughout the entire building, classroom renovations, and the 2 wings that were not touched before, the cafeteria, roof replacement, and then the new gymnasium, which is that other white square you see up there at the top left. That's kind of all of the potential proposed improvements.
And just so everybody understands, you might say, well, why are we building just enough for 2 more grades? Why not build it big enough for 4 grades? When you go out for a CN or for a building referendum, they don't let you build to projection, only to what the current projection is going to be within that time of building. So we can't get it approved for 4 more grades. But without adding those 7 classrooms, there's no way we can get 2 grades over there. So it makes no sense to go through this whole process just to move 1 grade. So we really feel strongly that this additional 7 classroom foundation here is necessary.
So the last piece of the puzzle is the cost. And this breaks down the cost with each of those pieces that we've talked about here. See, starting with what we call the DEMA upgrades of the House Bill 49. The mechanical upgrades, a little over $4 million there, sprinklering the entire building. The classroom renovations, a little over $7 million. The window replacement, a little over $2 million. The new gymnasium piece, a little over $8 million. The sidewalk upgrades, and then the cafeteria re-roof takes us to a little over $27 million. Then that classroom addition is another $7 million, so the total there is a little over $34 million I think, again, the important piece to remember here, Sean mentioned earlier, with the 80-20 split, the local requirement to pay for 20%, that would only be around $7 million to get you this $34 million worth of potential improvements to the school.
And there's another big point that I know Brad is going to make here, but I'm going to serve him up. How many square feet would this new building be as you've drawn it up?
This new building, it would be about 75,200 square feet total.
75,200 square feet. So there might be a lot of people out there saying, well, why don't you just build a whole new school? 75,000 square foot building, we're gonna have one brand spanking new, because what we have done already is brand new. Those renovations over there right now, down those existing wings we've redone, it's all brand new. Every smart board, the heating and air, it's all brand new. So we're gonna have an existing 75,000 square foot brand new building for about a $7 million investment or a $34 million market price. What would a new 75,000 square foot building cost us? Market
Over
rate?
60 million.
How much?
So over 60 million, so almost double what this renovation will cost.
Yeah. So it's not just as cheap to build new in some cases, and this one is a prime example of that. In case you're wondering at home, we have figured out how much approximately this will cost the average taxpayer in Laurel. And remember, the average taxpayer gets assessed per $100 of assessed value on their home. The average home in Laurel is assessed at $15,000, which is really a $150,000 home, because remember, in Sussex County, it's 10% of market rate. So the average taxpayer right now who owns a $150,000 market rate home would pay an additional $72 a year to cover their portion of the $7 million, or $6 per month. So we'll be following the continuum that we've outlined previously, before Mr. Hastings began. And does anybody have any questions for Mr. Hastings? Nobody? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Hastings.
Okay, North Laurel Early Learning Academy Certificate of Necessity. Recommend to approve the North Laurel Early Learning Academy Certificate of Necessity as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Nichols, second Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols?
Approve.
Mr. Lee?
Approve.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
So approved.
Yay. We're going to be in the game at least, so we'll see what happens. Thank you, Mr. Hastings. Thank you, Board of Education.
So, want to explain the process now? It's been approved
It's been approved.
by us to.
Mr. Hastings will submit, and his group will submit the application by August, and then they're waiting game until November to see if we've been approved.
You submit it to the state, and then waiting game.
Submit to the state, it goes in with any other CNs that are submitted.
For any other, all over Delaware.
District and what available funds are.
And then we should know something by November, if it's been approved, and then that's when it would be set up and,
Public meetings, et cetera.
right, okay. Alrighty, beautiful. Financial report. Horsey.
Good evening.
Okay. So our accomplishments since last month, the security camera upgrade in Malala has been completed. If you recall, last month we were waiting on about 9 cameras that were back ordered. They have been received and are installed. Everything's fully operational. Our Citizens Budget Oversight Committee had their first meeting on June 13th, and we do have one committee member here tonight, Ms. Laura Gibbons. We've been working at district office and with the schools on our FY24 units and positions planning, trying to get ready for next school year. In your packets tonight is the FY24 tax warrant for the board's approval. We have a proposed total tax rate for FY '24 of $4.91 and 912 cents. That's hard to say. And I apologize, there is a typo there. The increase is 0.6642. The increases are due to increases in special education costs and also a local match for the enhanced MCI. Our preliminary budget for FY '24 is also included in your packets tonight. Overall, we have an initial budget deficit of over $957,000. However, I will say that the initial projections for our revenue are very conservative. We only estimate about 90% of our revenue that we receive in FY '23 until we have more definitive numbers from DOE, and also it's also based on our unit count from September of '22. And then on the other side, with the expenditure side, we do account for an increase in our salaries due to step increases and the like. So we have a reduced kind of revenue side, but still an increase on the expenditure side. So we do have a fairly hefty budget deficit right now. However, we are anticipating some increased enrollment and increased funding for the final budget. However, though, I do still anticipate a deficit. Just to give you a look at the estimation for our local carryover and local reserve, if you see our estimate for FY '23 there to the right, and our estimate for FY '24, so that you can kind of get a visual on that. Things we have coming up, we have our fiscal year '23 closeout, which is currently in process. We have our FY '24 salary updates for our 12-month employees that we'll be doing in July. Our local funds audit for FY '22 is currently in process, and our school construction audit for FY '20, we still haven't received a final report for it yet. And of course, we're still waiting on the enhanced MCI until we spend our regular MCI. And then our consolidated grant application, we have an early submission in July, and our FY '24 salary updates for our 10-month employees, which we will have done in August. And then that's our monthly look at the reserve fund, so that's updated for the end of May. So you can tell we are basically right on target as we were at the same time last year. Okay, any questions for me?
I got a question that's, it has to do with when we picked up both the bonds for our two different projects here. We bought them at different times. When would the retirement be on either one of those bonds? I mean, they're going to retire at different times, right?
Yes, so in the tax warrant, there is a schedule. So we have bonds listed on page 8 of the tax warrant. We have bonds from FY '15, FY '14, FY '13, and FY '12.
And they were 20 years. So it'd be 30, the first one will retire in 32 then.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one retire. 23.
What's the question?
About 9 years from now, we'll be paid out on the first one.
Yeah, so each year we adjust the debt service tax rate based on the payments that we have coming up for the coming year.
I'm just thinking about that as far as presenting this to the community and stuff, that, you know, it's not like we should be able to take a reduction here and,
It went down, it already did.
Yeah.
So it had a
Yeah.
reduction, it's been going down.
Each year it gets adjusted for the actual
Check each one of your tax bills and
principal.
say,
And
yeah, but most people I'm talking to, they say they can't see it. I don't know whether it's I don't know what it is.
Can't see it.
I don't know
Maybe,
why they can't see it.
I don't know either. And I knew they were supposed to reduce after 5 years, they would start reducing.
I would like to propose that at the next board meeting, Mrs. Horsey, show the reduction, how it's happened over the
How it's been
lifespan.
progressing coming
How about
down.
that?
Yeah,
Might not be much, but you, okay, I can tell you why. Because what's going down with the law school district is going up with Sussex Tech. That's what I've seen.
is that what it is? I don't know.
I figured it out. I've got every one of mine. I lay them in and figure it out.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Horsey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. FY '24 preliminary budget. Recommend to approve the FY '24 preliminary budget as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Lee, second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
And Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
So approved. Official tax warrant report. Recommend to approve tax warrant report as submitted. The county property tax rate of $4.9120 on every $100 of assessed value and $24.30 per captation pending any changes to the state's bond bill on June 30th, 2023. Do I have a first?
So moved.
First, Mr. Lee.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. New no unfinished business, new business, school choice. Recommend approval of school choice as a group.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of school choice as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Fundraisers. Recommend approval of fundraisers as a group.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of fundraisers as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Rentals, recommend to approve request of Caitlin Justice, Laurel Pop Warner, for use of North Laurel Early Learning Academy athletic field from August the 1st through November the 30th, 2023, to hold Laurel Pop Warner practices and games. Practice times during the week will be 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., and Saturday game days will start with setup at 6:30 a.m. and games start at 9 a.m. Certificate of liability insurance will be provided once received from Henlopen Pop Warner.
I recommend approval of use of facility fee and custodial fees waived.
Okay,
Second.
Mrs. Isler, and second by Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mr. Lee.
Approved.
So approved. Professional trips, recommend approval of trips as a group.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mr. Lee.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of trips as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, I believe, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
And Mr. Lee.
Approved.
So approved. 2023 Delaware School Board Association, the DSBA membership. Recommend approving the 2023-2024 DSBA membership dues of $5,317. These dues have been budgeted and approved by the Director of Finance.
So moved. Second.
First, Mr. Nichols, second by Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols. Mr. Lee.
Approved.
So approved. Table. We are tabling, number 11
Item I.
on the,
Item I. Number 11, item I.
the number 11, item I. It's the only one.
Or one.
We are tabling. Possible action on executive session items. Personnel attachment A, professional. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment A.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote. Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment B, which is support staff.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mr. Nichols, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
And Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
So approved. Attachment C, cafe, recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment C.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler?
Second.
Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
And Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend attachment D, coaches, to approve as listed in attachment D.
So moved.
First, Mr. Lee.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Approval attachment E, upper positions. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment E.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mr. Nichols. Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment F, upper positions. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment F.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment G, administrator. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment G.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. The reorganization board meeting scheduled for Wednesday, July 5th, 2023 at 5:30 PM at the Laurel Middle High School Cafe. The regular board meeting scheduled for Wednesday, August the 16th at 7 PM right here in the Laurel Middle School Cafe. Motion, we adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
We adjourn at 8 PM. Thank you,
See you,
everyone.
Susan, wait, grandbaby is gonna be born by C-section right now.